As you can see, I'm actually wearing ATEC orange this morning, not my usual green colours. And you can also see that my topic is not the one that John... So it was just too difficult. So this one I thought was a little bit more contentious. So this is my presentation. Is the aviation industry evil? What's the bigger picture? How can you cash in on climate change? And first what I'm going to do is start looking at the aviation industry as a target, rightly or wrongly, of Green Group action.
At London's Heathrow Airport, a group of protesters have run onto the tarmac and have climbed on top of a plane. The campaigners are members of the environmental group Greenpeace. They climbed onto the plane, which had just arrived on a flight from Manchester, the northwest of England. No passengers were on board at the time. Greenpeace says the stunt was organised to challenge plans for a third runway at the airport. We're going to talk live now to one of the protesters, Sarah Sharaka, who's on top of the plane. She joins us now live from Heathrow. Sarah, what are you doing up there?
Hi. Well, at the moment I'm sat on top of the fuselage of a plane that's just come in from Manchester to London Heathrow. And we just wrapped a banner around the tail fin that says climate emergency, no third runway. And the reason we've done that is because scientists tell us that we only have a few years left to bring carbon emissions down. And yet the government wants to almost double the size of this airport. And I'm looking at it here now. It's absolutely massive already. And it's already the biggest airport in the world. Now, clearly, that can't happen if we're supposed to be taking our climate change commitments seriously. And we're here to tell Gordon Brown he has to draw a line in the sand and that this new runway cannot and will not be built.
Sarah, I'll talk to you in just a moment about the issue of climate change and this protest. First of all, tell us how you and your fellow protesters managed to breach security at Heathrow.
Well, it's very simple. We just walked down some stairs from the terminal, out through a door, up some stairs, and then onto the air bridge. I think we have exposed a hole in the security here, but really the reason why we're here is to expose Gordon Brown and the hole in his climate change policy and the contradiction between this unchecked aviation expansion and his climate change policy.
So describe the scene around you at the moment. Obviously there are police and security people standing around you. What's going to happen, when you come down? How long do you intend to stay up there?
Well, we'll be coming down very shortly. As I say, we've just finished wrapping a banner around the tail fin, and we're in touch with security on the ground, and they're bringing us down safely now in what's called a cherry picker. And yeah, we will get arrested, but obviously we've thought about this very carefully, and we're really, really serious about what we're doing, and we really care. We don't want dangerous climate change to happen, and we just feel that a line has to be drawn in the sand. This airport cannot expand.
What do you say to those who argue that flying is not the culprit as far as CO2 emissions are concerned and the rising greenhouse gases, that it's just a tiny percentage of greenhouse gas emissions that are down to the airline industry, the aviation industry, that most of it is to do with emissions from power stations and from petrol-driven vehicles and the like?
Well, obviously we have to be bringing our emissions down in every sector, but actually aviation is really significant. It's 13% of our climate change effect in the UK, and that's more than any other country. We British fly more than any other country, and this airport is the biggest in the world. So obviously we can make a really big difference to the fight against climate change if we drew a line in the sand and said, no, we're not going to expand any further.
Sarah, you talk about the line in the sand. BAA, the people...
So this was February the 25th at Heathrow this year. And as you can see, the aviation sector is being targeted, and just as the journalist from CNN asked, what about emissions from all other sources? Is it a reasonable targeting of the aviation sector? So I'd like to spend a bit of time looking closely at the sector and whether or not it is in fact evil. Global emissions, it contributes only between 2 and 3.5% in terms of human-induced climate change. In Australia, less than 2%, and in terms of global transport emissions, it's around 12 to 13%. It compares quite considerable, starkingly in my opinion, compared to 74% from road transport. It is true that aviation's contribution to future emissions is possibly going to rise. Certainly Australia's air passenger numbers have grown in the last decade domestically and internationally, and growth is expected to double in 15 years. But, and certainly I did take this from IATA's website, there are quite a number of initiatives that the sector is looking at. Certainly fuel efficiency. Of course, fuel costs for the aviation sector are highly material to operating costs. It's a very large proportion of expenditure, so of course saving fuel is not a bad thing to do for the hip pocket as well. Fuel substitution, not a favourite one of mine, but you can't knock them for giving it a go. Apparently, I saw an interview with Richard Branson, leisurely sipping coconut milk from his coconut bowl in some deck chair shortly after the Virgin flight had landed that had been flown across the, with no passengers in it, with 100% biofuels. And someone had done the sums that if you got together all of the world's global supply of coconut, oil, which you can use as a biofuel in a blend, you could possibly fuel all the aircraft leaving Heathrow for around about 18 days. So, big challenge. And of course, more efficient air traffic control management, and this point in particular, which is a favourite of mine, around about thinking of the future of the aviation sector and whether or not you can get a little smarter with ways of getting people together. Because I know that some companies, like I'm shamelessly dropping brands in this presentation, British Petroleum, who are now called Beyond Petroleum, in the early 90s, realised that they weren't in the business of just selling barrels of oil to service stations and then in turn to motorists. They actually now sell energy, and in fact they are Australia's largest manufacturer of solar photovoltaic panels. Similarly, for example, I know British Airways are interested in video and teleconferencing, getting vertically integrated as well with some fast land transport. And as I said, less fuel, of course, is fewer emissions, lower operating expenses and better management, particularly with such a volatile market in terms of oil prices at the moment. But I do believe the aviation industry has been a wee scapegoat. I'm not encouraging you to take on this particularly blaming issue, but when you look at this, I just want to keep the focus on the fact that we have a very large challenge with emissions coming from private vehicles. And I'm going to give you a case study on food miles. The theory about food miles is that ships have to carry food. Oh, I should probably say that. I tried to take out the brands because I was looking at the. But essentially, there was 2 years ago, there was a British dairy company that ran a campaign against a New Zealand dairy company on the basis of food miles, and I'm just going to briefly tell you what that means. That ships have to carry food a long way from New Zealand to its markets, in this case the UK. Ships burn a lot of oil when they carry food a long way, and of course burning oil produces carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide in turn contributes to global warming, and therefore to fight global warming you need to stop buying products from New Zealand. And the parallel between this and what has been mentioned already this morning around that, the protectionism, I suppose, that's being put up in European markets, in particular around aviation, is quite stark. Let me just go back to this one. Here, in fact, is the ad that was run by Country Life, and it reads, it's a bit fuzzy, before Anchor butter, that's the New Zealand product, reaches your table, it's frozen and shipped over 11,000 miles from New Zealand. Country Life, that's the UK one, however, is made with milk from British farms, and on it goes. It was so successful, this issue of raising the issue around food miles, that Helen Clark, the New Zealand Prime Minister, publicly stated, and I'm just going to read it because it's right up there with what's happening with tourism. A key risk was overseas consumers opting to buy local products in an effort to cut carbon emissions from transporting goods. And unless New Zealand was seen to be going the extra mile on sustainability, it ran the risk of being labelled as unsustainable producers and major carbon emitters just trying to get produce to overseas markets. Now, interestingly, enter the facts. In 2006, a university research granted from New Zealand showed that In fact, New Zealand has greater production efficiency in many food commodities than the UK, mainly because a lot of New Zealand cows and sheep are grazing free range and don't require feed, put in feedlots which high nitrogen content and these sorts of things. And compared to the UK, in the case of dairy and sheep production, New Zealand is by far more energy efficient. In fact, 2 times as efficient in the case of dairy and 4 times as efficient in the case of sheep meat. My point about this is that the research concluded only 2% of the environmental impact of food comes from transporting it from the farm to the shop. And as far as the tourism industry is concerned, and where the aviation industry, in my opinion, has been, I suppose, an unfortunate scapegoat for all other woes and on climate change, is that you need to get engaged, you need to know the facts, you need to manage perceptions well, and perhaps one more question needs to be answered around the area, and I'll get to that, is tourism industry, the next tobacco. The difference between the two is, of course, tobacco knew that smoking caused cancer, but they were in denial. They actively took no action and created a PR smokescreen. The difference, it's a slight one here, possibly, with the tourism industry, or certainly with aviation, is that we know that flying does contribute to human-induced climate change, and most carriers have taken, in fact, the international agency or association that represents aviation has done so. They're taking action to do it, but there is this danger, and it's not just for aviation, but a temptation, and perhaps sometimes out of ignorance, to greenwash. Absolutely critical to be able to deliver on your claims. One example, it's not the sponsor but a subsidiary, can I mention? So Jetstar, right? Okay, all right. So since it started offering offsets last year, when were we, 2008? Yes, within 12 months ago, I believe. Jetstar collected just under $300,000 from voluntary passenger contributions to offset emissions for flights. In an article I read in The Australian in October last year, Simon Westerway, the Jetstar spokesperson, when quizzed about where the money was being spent for the offsets, he said, the airline would now probably make its first investment before the end of the year, but had yet to decide where it would be. Now, if I'm parting voluntarily with my money to be planting trees or buying clean energy, I'm a little alarmed that Jetstar possibly has put up to $300,000 in a bank account somewhere and is getting interest on it. I don't know what's happened, but at least in terms of managing perceptions, there's a very real danger that this is what consumers could start thinking. So delivering on claims is absolutely critical. So in summing up this first part of the presentation, the key ingredients to becoming, I suppose, climate credible is accountability, know your data, be informed and take responsibility for your part of the problem, and in fact also part of the solution. Transparency, make clear to stakeholders your impacts and how you're tracking to minimise them. And credibility, do this with integrity and honesty. And remember, Australians really do have a good lie detector. So let's turn now to how you can cash in on climate change. Just briefly, 2 things to acknowledge. One, we all do cause climate change in what we do, either through, I suppose, coal and gas burning for electricity, lighting, heating and so forth, liquid fuels for transport, waste from kitchens, general garbage, paints and solvents and so forth. The other thing to look at is, I suppose, the interconnectivity of the products and services that we provide, and from the tourist perspective, it's a kind of a seamless thing. And I'm hoping this terribly dodgy slide, and I apologise for it, will connect with everybody in the audience. We have what is supposed to be Europe, I suppose the generating region for some of our markets, for our clients and tourists. There they are. We have some insurance and perhaps, there we go, a travel agent, maybe a wholesaler, there it is, a carrier, the destination, Australia, and the marketers of that destination, accommodation, transport, and any sort of road land content in terms of travel, and then conference and meetings, and of course, the Australian, the host. And you know this, a poor transit experience can impact on an experience the tourist will have at an attraction, or an excellent food and beverage experience can really enhance a meeting or a conference. And in the same way, if each and every business does its own bit to take a small step to adding value to the tourism product, just by making it a little bit greener, the total result will be that it benefits everyone in the Australian tourism industry. To me, the challenge for the Australian inbound tourism industry is to be ready for your buyers. Someone in this room told me recently that a tour wholesaler had come back from ITB in Berlin and was asked about various Australian tourism products and what their green credentials were, and to verify those credentials. It tells me two things. One, consumers' expectations are changing. They're demanding greener qualities from the tourism product and service. And secondly, that there's some pressure now along the tourism product supply chain. And to me, this is the main driver. It's not yet government regulation as it is in the energy sector. It is the supply chain pressures are the main drivers for changes in the industry. And you need to be ready. This is fresh off the press despite it being polled in March. It's the first time I've presented it, and I believe anyone has from the Climate Institute. I won't go through it, but it was looking at offsets. And nearly 4/5 of Australians would prefer to buy products from a carbon-considerate company. 1/5 of those have in fact taken advantage of parting with some cash to do that in the last 12 months. Some of them are repeat customers as well. But the third dot point I think is interesting, that only 35% have actually heard something about offsets. So there's quite a task ahead for the industry to make not only an awareness that there's an opportunity for tourists to get engaged in part of the solution, but that also that it's an easy transaction for them to do that. And of course the fourth one, we always know market research shows us that people are willing to pay more for a greener product, whether or not they part with the money or their intention to change their behaviour is somewhat different. But there is an opportunity to add value to your product and possibly charge more. Which leads me to my penultimate slide. To be ready for your buyers, you need to understand your own impacts. And often, by understanding your own impacts, you'll get to know your opportunities. They'll emerge as you look at what you do and the impacts that you make, providing you do it diligently. You need to make a plan, and it's saving energy. It's switching to green power, and as a last resort, perhaps offsetting. It's packaging with like-minded product and service providers. You'll improve your attractiveness to a changing market and add value to your products. Charge a premium if necessary. Market as clean and green. Brand and reputation are a bonus for being buy-ready, and also you'll be attracting, I suppose, that very elusive Gen Y who want to work in places that are doing the right thing to connect with their own values. Reporting publicly is important too. And of course, make it easy for clients to get involved. And this is in defence of Jetstar this time. When I compare Jetstar and Virgin Blue offsets, Jetstar got twice the number, almost 10% of their customers offset in a 12-month period last year. They were a little alarmed because they hadn't expected such a big interest in it. The reason was because you could tick the box and it would come off your credit card, $1.24, Sydney Ballina type thing. But with the Virgin Blue option, you had to do a separate transaction. And that's not making it easy, that's making it hard. So make it easy for your clients to get involved, and as I mentioned, offsetting as a last resort. If you're going to be really fair dinkum, you've got to clean up your own backyard, your operations and your product that you're providing. So in sum, tourism does not have to be the next tobacco, providing you manage perceptions by being accountable for your part of the problem and the solution. You need to be transparent with your stakeholders about your actions and impacts, and being credible by delivering on claims, particularly the green ones. You need to realise the fragility of the tourism product supply chain, but also the opportunity in moving others along and acting early. Be buyer ready and cash in on the international movement to be just a bit greener. And tonight, when you're out being Mad Hatters and you're sampling the wonderful Hunter Semillon. Perhaps after the first glass, but certainly not later than the third glass, I invite you to sit with people from different parts of the supply chain and have a bit of a mind bash about how to think outside the box, about how you could just maybe 5% make greener your product, how you can work together to be bio-ready and to really cash in on the opportunities presented by climate change. Thank you.